Hello, hello. It's the Happy Heat Pump podcast. Beanland and I talking all things heat pumps. One of the things that we have sometimes asked people is, what is the alternative to heat pumps? If you're in a net zero world, what could you do if you didn't have heat pumps? Heat pumps are the most efficient electric form of heating, but are there other ways of heating without heat pumps for people who find them distasteful, noisy, expensive, all subjects which we've been discussing on the podcast. So, Bean, I want to look at this from the individual's point of view. I mean, there are alternatives for society about how we could not move away, how we could do energy without heat pumps. But just, I'm a householder. I want to go net zero. I'm allergic to heat pumps. First alternative, I'm guessing, would be an electric boiler. How good are electric boilers?
Well, electric boilers, of course, have been around for decades. And the answer is they're exceptionally good in that they're almost 100% efficient. So you're getting 1 kilowatt hour of heat out from 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in. So it's 1 for 1, COP, if you like, of 1. So the problem in the UK we have is because electricity is expensive, it means that they're expensive to run.
Sure.
Because fundamentally, it's a piece of technology, brilliant. It's it's effectively an immersion in a box.
Right. So an electric boiler, can that heat water directly as it comes through? Yes, I think it can.
You can do instantaneous, absolutely. You can do instantaneous flow heaters to do hot water instantaneously. That's absolutely possible. So you can use it for both heating and for hot water.
And they run at reasonably high temperatures?
Yeah, they will run at absolutely. They'll run at high temperature.
If you've been running a gas boiler, you pull it out, you put it in, you don't need anything in your garden. You don't need a garden.
No, you don't.
You don't need an outside wall.
No. Installation costs very low, capital costs very low, operational cost very high, unless you can combine it with some local generation. So if you've got solar PV on your roof, and or you've got a battery and you're using that to buy electricity cheaply overnight and use it to run your electric boiler at other times of day, then you can start to make that electric boiler combination really very attractive. And in fact, there was an example very recently, someone I met who has a listed building in London, was desperate to decarbonize it, was anguishing about not being able to get rid of gas. And literally 2 months later, he told me, I've done it. I said, what have you done? He said, I put in a massive electric boiler, a bank of Powerwall batteries, and I am arbitraging the price of gas, the price of electricity overnight. He couldn't put solar on the roof because it's a listed building, but he got enough battery storage to be able to make enough difference to his average price of electricity to make it what, in his view, was a success.
Right. So assuming you're not heating overnight or not very much heat overnight, you stock up the battery overnight.
And you run the boiler, absolutely.
Run the boiler in the day off the batteries. And for a flat where we've discussed flats and we will discuss them again, but for flats where you haven't been able to organize a kind of collective solution and it's not going to be very easy for you to install your own heat pump and you're not allowed to put something in the wall or shove something outside on the balcony, electric boiler looks like an attractive option. Now, the disadvantage relative to a heat pump, the advantage is you don't need anything outside. You probably need less change in your pipes and functioning.
You know my thoughts on that, but yes.
Yeah. The disadvantage relative to a heat pump is that it does use 4 times more electricity. Or 3 times more electricity.
And it's not a problem. It's not just the cost. Because to the individual user, it's the cost of the electricity. But for our UK PLC, we got to generate that extra electricity. And we got to transmit it down the wires. So we need more investment in generation and more investment in transmission. And that's why government actually would prefer people to be using technologies that can get a better conversion ratio than 1-to-1. So that's the fundamental. But we absolutely accept that this isn't necessarily about heat pumps everywhere. This is about stopping burning things, and there will be other solutions. And there are other variants around electric boilers, so thermal batteries that will store energy in a slightly different way. We've got phase change materials being used by companies like Sunamp in Scotland, which can all be electrically driven. So they're all resistive heat driven, but they're alternatives to an electric boiler, which will drive efficiency, particularly because you can make much more use of flexible electricity tariffs.
So, but the key thing to making electricity work, if you're not running it at a kind of 4 units of heat for every unit of electricity, or 3 or 2, the key thing is you want to then be able to buy the electricity and the cheap points, and basically you're doing everybody a favor if you're not using it at peak. You're using it when there's spare electricity in the system.
Ideally, or you generate some yourself.
You've just mentioned these other options. I just want to go to, what were you saying? Thermal.
So there are thermal batteries.
So how does that? But that's like storage heating you're talking about.
Yeah. So
those old storage heaters were useless, but by my experience.
Yeah. Well, the new generation of night storage heaters. You're right. I mean, there was a problem. Night storage heaters had a bad reputation because you heat them up overnight. You go off to work in the morning. By the time you get home, they're already cold, and therefore you've got a miserable evening. I think that those manufacturers who are making the new generation of night storage will tell you that they're much more controllable, so you can hold the heat in more and release it in a more measured way. So there are lots of variants on what is effectively the same option to use resistive heat. So red heat, you think about your kettle, the filament in your kettle and what have you, and the filaments in old red heat light bulbs, in order to generate heat, and you hold that heat in some form of storage, which could be, as I said, could be phase change, it could be solid state, and that allows you to get away from fossil fuels. It's another option to the heat pump option.
But it's electrifying your heat, and it's doing so, you're buying electricity hopefully when there's some spare. Okay, there's another option. I've seen it once in a house, actually in France, and it was a wood burning, it was a pellet burning boiler. So it is a boiler, it's a furnace, and they have a big portion of the garage with the pellets in because it burned through them. And then they basically go through a huge kind of hop into the boiler and it burns them. So it's burning, but it's burning wood basically.
Yeah. So the domestic renewable heat incentive provided a subsidy for pellet boilers, and for solid wood boilers too. And there is still potential within the boiler upgrade scheme to convert to a pellet boiler if you're off gas. So it's being seen now as an alternative for rural communities.
Okay.
Because we're trying to stop burning anything in urban environments, of course. You know that we're in smokeless zone.
Because there will be emissions.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So at the moment, that is still an option. The price of pellets, I haven't checked lately what the price of pellets looks like, but the price of pellets has been a problem in the past. And also there's the origin of the pellets. Where are they coming from? Are they being imported from, a lot were coming from Russia, probably none these days. A lot were coming from Canada, a lot coming from Louisiana. A lot of the pellets that are being burnt in Drax are coming from overseas. So there's a question mark about the true carbon nature of the fuel you're burning.
But in principle, burning wood is okay because it grows again. So you put it into the air, you pull it out the air. It's
an option. Yeah.
And so that is an option. They're I mean, I don't know how much they cost, but they are.
Well, good pellet boilers are not cheap.
Right.
So they'll need some work. There are a direct replacement in terms of temperatures.
Yeah.
So you're back to you don't have to worry at all about your radiators, your underfloor heater, anything like that. That is absolutely true. But I think that people are increasingly of the overall view that burning trees isn't a particularly attractive
I
thing
think
to do.
I'm just looking at it. I think it probably wouldn't work if everybody wanted to do it, because I think then we would start building up.
Look at Easter Island used to be forested and supported a population of 40,000 people. Now there's no trees and there's no one living there.
Yeah, so you probably couldn't all do it, but it is an option. Apart from your storage heater, your electric boiler, and your biomass boiler, is there anything else that
Well, it's biogas. So off the gas grid, we already have a significant number of people using LPG, liquid petroleum gas. So storing it in a Cala tank, either underground or in the garden.
And where does that come from?
So that's LPG is brought into the country at the moment and distributed by people like Gala. There are lots of brands distributing.
But that's not green. That's
no, that's a fossil fuel.
Yeah,
but you could displace that with biogases.
Gotcha.
So in fact, you are burning up methane, and in fact, I think that quite a lot of LPG supplies are already being having an element of biogases fed into them. So there is already mixing going on, and you can actually, from some suppliers, buy 100% biogas. So if you have an LPG boiler at home and it's got an appropriate burner in it, you could burn 100% and say, I am now fully decarbonized because I'm burning biogas. And I'm wondering a proportion of the market. There's no doubt.
I'm wondering how much that gas is costing if it's truly green.
The cost is it's going to be an interesting element, and also I think the challenge there is that there will, and we talked previously about industries needing to be decarbonised as well. So where you're going to have a competition between industry, who needs a decarbonising solution in order to stay in existence, so it's existential, they will be prepared to pay a premium for the biogas, which the homeowner won't. So I think that there will be that tension between where those fuels are used. In the same way that we talked about hydrogen, there's this tension between where it's used and where it can be economically used in the best way.
I wanted to come onto hydrogen, but I mean, look, essentially, for me as a householder going net zero, electricity, you'd only afford it if you buy it at night. Storage heating, you're buying it at night. Biomass boiler or a green gas, a net zero gas, if you've got a boiler for that. Okay, so those are the options. And then I can't say I want to be on a hydrogen grid individually. As a country, we could say we're not going as much electric as Beanland wants. We are going hydrogen. Now, on PM, I have to say we have reported on this extensively and visited a couple of these places, hydrogen villages, where they were planning to basically kick everybody off the gas grid and say, you're now part of the hydrogen system. Redcar had a district in Redcar was portioned off for that. Now, that's not a decision for the individual household. As I say, that is above everybody's pay grade. It's a kind of regional, national decision to use hydrogen. And hydrogen can be green. My experience of those experiments was that nobody really wanted hydrogen in their home. Has a bad rap for being...
There was certainly an enormous amount of pushback from the residents who felt that it was being done. This now talks to a fundamental, I think, in this whole debate about people not wanting things done to them.
Yeah.
They will hopefully want to be fully engaged ultimately in the debate, and that's why we're making this podcast. But what they didn't like is the fact it was being done to them, and I think that there was a degree of...
No one wanted it, and basically there was a degree of they never really got off the ground. Even though I also told you can have entirely new free appliances.
Both of the trials were scrapped.
Yeah,
and they were scrapped largely because the level of consumer pushback was so high.
But the National Infrastructure Commission and others all pushed back against an option that says we don't go as electric, we use hydrogen as a replacement for natural gas. And it was back to your point, Bean. The problem with using hydrogen for heating is that there are a lot of things, you can use other things for heating, and there are really valuable things you want to do that you have no choice but hydrogen, really. And so if you're going to use hydrogen, maybe reserve it for those things. That's really the...
There's a brilliant pyramid which shows the usages of hydrogen and what we should be having at the apex where we absolutely must use hydrogen, and then the value as you come down the pyramid. And domestic heat is not quite in the bottom layer, but I think it's pretty close to the bottom.
Because we've got those other alternatives.
Because we have the other
Yeah,
alternatives.
absolutely. And that's it. I mean, I suppose the other
question is putting the right technology in the right place, charged with the right function. And if we can do that in most of our buildings, we'll probably get to where we need to go.
And I'm sure there are people who say what you could do, this is your final option as a country. Again, this is a sort of national option, not an individual option, is you could use natural gas and bury the carbon dioxide.
Yeah, if you can make carbon capture and storage work, you can't use gas in domestic boilers and bury the carbon dioxide because you can't capture it at domestic level. You know, the concept of having carbon capture and storage in every house is just not even. So if we said, so you're going down that route,
right?
You would build more power stations,
yes,
burn the gas, capture the carbon at the power station, and still use electricity to heat everything.
Okay, so but the problem is that gas doesn't get you out, doesn't get you to net zero,
right,
even with carbon.
The challenge there is that you've then got to put more cables in the ground. And the whole point about trying to get electricity use down to this, 3 for 1, 4 for 1, is that it reduces the level of investment we need to make in cables in the ground.
Right.
And that has a huge impact on bills because, of course, development of the grid, both transmission nationally, but also the distribution, the local distribution, all those cables in the ground need to be paid for somehow.
Okay, so we're back to heat pumps are more efficient than most of the other technologies, but you can use electric boilers, you can use biomass boilers. Country could go and use hydrogen to generate heat, but all of these things look relatively unattractive compared to very, very efficient systems.
There will be some places where they are the best option.
But they're the best option, yeah.
The key is to find them and use them there.
And use them wisely.
Yeah.
Keep them as tools and use them wisely. Look, it's a really, really interesting one, that. Really interesting one. I think that's enough, though. We've always said bite-sized chunks. Thanks for listening, for getting this far. happyheatpumppod@gmail.com is our email address. Leave comments. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, everywhere, basically. And spread the word about the show.